Hi, I am Professor Amitabh Banerjee, uh, an epidemiologist and author of COVID-19 Pandemic, a Third Eye. I have had a vast field experience in investigating disease outbreaks in the armed forces. And after 27 years in the armed forces, for the past almost 20 years, I am working as an academician in a medical school as a professor. So today we'll be discussing chapter 9 of this book, COVID-19 Pandemic, a Third Eye. The title of the chapter is You Are As Healthy as You Think You Are. This discusses the state of mind and how the mind can impact the body. Anxiety, panic, and loss of livelihoods was bound to trigger a wave of diseases other than COVID. Instead of taking harsh measures, policymakers needed to adapt to the stages of the pandemic as it evolved. In this pandemic, policymakers kept the panic alive, even after it was known that there were some high-risk groups who were vulnerable, and majority the healthy people and young were not vulnerable to the adverse effects of COVID-19. And the panic created more deaths, and we are explored the mind-body connection in this chapter. The French philosopher René Descartes rejected the notion that mind and body are connected. Descartes dismissed the idea that mind influences physical health. He speculated that mind comprises unidentifiable and immaterial substance, so it cannot affect the body, which is solid matter. Gilbert Ryle nailed it further by labeling the non-physical mind as the ghost in the machine. Western medicine adopted the separation proposed by Descartes. It also found it easier to fix a mechanical body without having to deal with the enigmatic ghost in the machine. Nevertheless, physicians down the edges are aware of the placebo effect contributing to the healing process. Placebo effect is when people get better when they believe falsely that they are getting an effective drug. Conversely, there is a nocebo effect, that is, negative thinking about an illness or therapy can adversely affect health. So, in practice, mind does affect the body. This nocebo effect was caused the most harm in this pandemic because the message given all over the world was this is a existential crisis, this coronavirus, in spite when the data showed otherwise. Fiction writers, free from constraints of scientific consensus, often get it right. 2 centuries after Descartes discarded the mind body connection, O. Henry elegantly narrates the nocebo and placebo effects in his classic short story, The Last Leaf. Set against the background of an epidemic of pneumonia, the story deals with mind body connection. What a coincidence. This is also dealing with an epidemic of pneumonia. O. Henry's story, The Last Leaf. Down with a nasty bout of pneumonia, the patient, a young lady, is full of negativity and impending doom of death. The view from her window is bare and dreary. She could see a brick house around which an old ivy vine climbed up, its leaves rapidly falling in the autumn. She kept counting the remaining ones. This symbolizes the ebbing of life from her body. This symbolized the ebbing of life. She started thinking that each leaf falling symbolized gradual ebbing of life from her body. The falling leaves act as a nocebo. She passively waits for death, believing it will coincide with the fall of the last leaf. Her doctor gives up hope. The penultimate day arrives. Only one leaf remains. There is strong wind and heavy rains throughout the night. An aging neighbor, a failed artist, comes to know about her He paints a leaf on the wall across. It turns out to be the only masterpiece he has ever painted. It looked like a real leaf. Next day, the lady sees the sole leaf standing in spite of the heavy winds and rain throughout the night. This gives her the will to fight and live. The painted leaf acts as a placebo. She recovers. The aging artist exposed to the elements succumbs to pneumonia. While O. Henry, in his short story, may have conveyed the mind body as a work of fiction, there is emerging evidence, albeit nebulous, of mind body connection. Fiction and fact seem to be merging. The concept of salitogenesis by Antonovsky in the 20th century, described in his book Health, Stress and Coping, suggested that life experiences help shape one's sense of coherence, making it comprehensible, meaningful, and manageable. This helps one to cope with stress. More recently, Martin Seligman distinguished between flourishing and languishing persons. Flourishing persons experience more positive feelings while languishing persons have more negative ones. So, in this pandemic, throughout there was a languishing messages like you stay home, you will save others, no one is safe. So, everybody, the panic level went up. It does affect. These phenomena not only shape mental well being but also have impact on physical health, both short term and long term. In the short term, stressors reduce immunity to infection, while in the long run, they may be risk factors for heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, other endocrine disorders, autoimmune disorders, skin disorders, and psychiatric illnesses. It is well known experience among students that acute stress of examination increases bouts of common colds, suggesting some inhibition of natural immunity. Research also suggests that psychological stressors increase risk of acute infectious respiratory infections. Increased risk of acute respiratory infections. Studies in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, which explores the interaction between stressors and immunity through release of chemical hormones, are still evolving. They encounter difficulties as both stress and immunity are multifaceted and difficult to measure. Exact pathways are difficult. However, there are other indirect effects which is easier to understand. Easier to understand is how stressors may impact immunity and health in indirect ways. Stress as a result of prolonged panic from pandemic drives people to unhealthy foods, tobacco and alcohol. People were confined to their house, they kept on asking, ordering from Zomato and other home deliveries. They put on weight, they took fast food, and they took extra alcohol. All this we witness the long queues at liquor shops during relaxation of lockdowns. The liquor shops were crowded when there was relaxation of lockdown. So this indirectly affects the health, stress. All this while lowering immunity in the short term increases the risk of chronic diseases. People losing their livelihood suffer from malnutrition, reducing the immunity to infection. So these are indirect ways which you don't require any fancy models or fancy pathways to understand this. Whether direct or indirect, the effects of panic-induced stress in the pandemic was highly detrimental to public health. The effects may be seen in the long run with higher rates of mental illness, alcoholism, substance abuse, chronic disease, while in the short run, large number of people will be susceptible to infections, disease due to low immunity. The common strategy of most governments in the pandemic was to instill fear in people. The strategy has been used in a paternalistic manner to make people compliant to COVID appropriate behavior. This approach may have been justified in the initial uncertain stages of the pandemic as a precautionary principle to err on the side of safety. This resulted in prolonged panic of populations and mass hysteria. Short-term stress transformed into long-term stress for many. Mostly these measures were inappropriate and the chronic stress due to suspended businesses, education, recreation and associated uncertainties caused immense harm due to adverse impact on mental, physical, and social well-being of people. While mathematical models continue to predict future waves, it does not require rocket science to predict a colossal wave of chronic mental and other non-COVID diseases against a background of severe malnutrition as a result of extreme measure to control an uncontrollable virus which has an infection fatality rate around 0.05 in our country up to 69 years of age. As in the Bhagavad Gita, we should have adapted to the stages of the pandemic as it evolved. First, there was tamas, that is darkness, destruction, and chaos, when nothing was known about the novel coronavirus and many fatalities were due to chaotic mismanagement. Then there was rajas, passion, action, confusion. The passion of scientists to fight the virus at all costs, actions which were sometimes inappropriate and confusing messages from experts, while subsequently we should have moved into sattva, which is goodness, constructive action, harmony, and learn to live with the virus. This is the way forward to react to the world from the global panic and to rescue the world. This is the way forward to rescue the world from global panic and mass obsessive compulsive disorder. Idea is that this should not be repeated in future pandemics. The strategy of public health is reassure the masses not to cause panic. Panic itself causes the nocebo effect and exploitation by people with vested interest, and it reduces the immunity and fight to good health. And this last leap, the movie also, Hindi movie Lutera, where Ranbir Kapoor and Sonakshi Sinha, this last leap was also a theme of a song where that Sonakshi Sinha is seeing the wall opposite and the leaves are falling and Ranbir Kapoor goes and sticks it. He's not an artist like the last leaf of O. Henry, but he, I think, uses something to stick it. So this is just a symbolic to show that a positive state of mind is health enhancing. So this is all I have to say. Idea is that in future pandemics, we should be we should not lose our mind and we should not generate panic. Thank you.